Google's brand new Pixel 6a is here. It's the first mid-ranger as well from the company to be powered by the Tensor processor, but just how does it fully stack up? We'll find out in this, our full review of the Pixel 6a. Thanks for watching 9to5 Google here on YouTube. Remember to thumbs up, hit subscribe and then tap the bell icon to be among the first to watch our upcoming videos. So Google's A series lineup started as a trimmed down version of a flagship with some obvious areas to cut. The Pixel 3's delightful matte glass body was swapped for plastic, the display was of a lesser quality, and so on and so forth. With the Pixel 6a, that formula largely remains the same, but not quite entirely. The glossy glass back of the Pixel 6 is mimicked with a glossy plastic backing, and the Gorilla Glass Victus on the front screen from the flagship is swapped for Gorilla Glass 3, but really those don't take away from the experience of using this phone. The plastic body of the 6a actually helps it become a significantly lighter smartphone, which is an attractive prospect in its own right, and while the plastic body of the 6a is very much plastic as we mentioned, it doesn't feel cheap. It emulates the look and feel of the standard Pixel 6 quite well on top of that, and you also get that lovely grippy matte black side rails on the sides on top of that to boot. It is tough to be too harsh on the 6a's display though. It's very much a tried and true formula after all. It's OLED, it has decent brightness, and has no issues with touch response, at least during our own testing. The biggest downside though is the 60Hz refresh rate, which certainly feels polarizing compared to most of today's other smartphones and a lot of mid-rangers out there. Naturally, the rest of Google's Pixel 6 lineup does make this feel like a little bit of a standout for some of the wrong reasons. Cutting down the refresh rate of the display makes the Pixel 6a feel a tad slower than it actually is, but it is easy to get used to rather quickly. It's just jarring if you've used high refresh rate panels and then you directly switch to this, which I'm sure many of you out there probably wouldn't do anyway. In that sense, you don't really know what you're missing unless you put this side by side with the latest Pixel 6 and 6 Pro with their 90 and 120Hz refresh rates respectively. Do we wish that Google had used a 90Hz display on the Pixel 6a? Well, sure, it definitely would have improved the experience, but $449, it's an obvious area to cut, and it makes sense in many ways, especially as most of those savings go towards the Google Tensor chip, which is under the hood instead. It is also important to note that the display is not perfect. It is incredibly easy to scuff and scratch, and the oleophobic coating on the display itself doesn't seem to be that good, or at least it hasn't been on a couple of our review units. But hey, at least it's a flat piece of glass, making screen protectors cheap and easy to find and hopefully then apply on top of that. There's another key thing about the Pixel 6a which we think, along with the display, some folks out there will love. It is much smaller. The Pixel 6a with its 6.1 inch screen diagonally, it measures in at 6 inches by 2.8 inches by 0.35 inches thick. It's smaller in every dimension to everything else that is currently in Google's smartphone lineups. The Pixel 6a itself isn't a small phone though, but it is absolutely manageable. It's certainly more comfortable than the 6 and the 6 Pro, that's for sure. And Google has nailed the balance in the hand with this particular A series model. It's something you notice the moment that you pick up the device for the very first time. It's light and the right size, but it's not too small either. Frustratingly, the Pixel 6a though runs the April security patch right out of the box as of the July 28th launch. It's actually still on Android 12L instead of QPR3, which was in beta form and has since released, which does bring about some minor UI changes. As such, areas like the security hub will warn you that the device has not had an update in up to 90 days and will prompt you to update though nothing is available yet. This is not an ideal situation, especially as Google has a software focused approach, but Google has told us that the first Pixel 6a update is in early August and Android 13 should then be also right around the corner. But looking past the launch software, the Pixel 6a's package is pretty much the same as any other Google phone, with Android 12's Material U being just as good as it is on Google's flagships. And more importantly, you're still getting that same suite of Pixel exclusive features all tied in here too. The Google Assistant's speedy translation on Pixel is great, and Gboard's faster and more accurate voice typing works just as well on the 6a as it does on Google's flagships. That's to say, it's the best in the game today. Really, the experience is barely altered from the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro. One new feature though that does arrive with the 6a, but soon is going to come to the rest of the lineup, is camouflage in the Google Photos app. The expansion of this magic eraser feature was announced back at Google I/O with the ability to mute the colour of objects in the photo so they don't distract from the main subject, We've only tested this feature briefly, but it does exactly what Google claims and with decent end results, and we're sure that many of you out there will be really excited to try this for yourself. But quickly looking past the features, it's the support timeline that deserves your attention with this phone. While many Android manufacturers are quick to stop supporting mid-range devices, in some cases shortly after launch, the Pixel 6a is getting the same support as the rest of Google's 6 series flagships, at least 3 years of major Android updates, and 5 years of monthly security patches on top of that. Only Samsung rivals that promise, but it doesn't apply to all of the company's mid-range phones, so this is quite a big deal for Google's mid-ranger. You could certainly get a cheaper phone than the Pixel 6a and even one that might be more feature-packed, but it won't see the same support window or even the same value ratio. For instance, the Pixel 6a used through its entire supported lifespan of 5 years will cost less than $100 per year. The popular OnePlus Nord N20 in the US market is a much cheaper device at under $300, but its shoddy update promise of one major Android update and regular security patches for 2 years means that the phone costs around $150 per year of its supported lifespan. That's certainly something to consider with the Pixel 6a. The other thing to note here is that with the Pixel 6a, it's not just your average mid-range smartphone, as it's running a flagship processor in Google's Tensor chip, the same exact chip that you'll actually find in the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, and really, that does show. The Pixel 6a holds up in day-to-day use, powering through most tasks without any issues, but I would say it doesn't feel exactly like the company's flagship devices. I'd personally describe using the Pixel 6a as a bit like the Pixel 6, but with battery saver mode enabled. Why? Well, the 60Hz display is certainly one element that makes the Pixel 6a feel a little bit slower, but the main culprit we found is actually the RAM, and specifically the RAM management. The Pixel 6a has 6GB of RAM included, just like the Pixel 5a before it. Sometimes the phone tends to offload apps in the background remarkably quickly. We've seen apps reload in as little as a few minutes, even with just 3 or 4 in the hot seat within that recent app menu. This issue isn't really a deal breaker in our review, but it does take away from the experience and just feels a little bit off. 6GB of RAM is plenty for Android 12 to flex its muscles, and paired with Tensor, it should lead to a smooth experience. Hopefully though, some optimization work in future updates will improve the RAM management issues that we have seen thus far. On the note of Google's Tensor processor though, let's discuss network performance. This is an area where the Pixel 6a felt middling at best, which isn't a surprise given all we've seen and heard about the complaints with the connectivity capabilities of the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro since they first debuted. During our time with the phone, we're left unimpressed overall, but also not massively disappointed by the network performance. My colleague Ben noticed that in a rural area in the US, the Pixel 6a would sometimes lose its connection on Google Fi much quicker than a Galaxy Z Fold 3. We've even had a few Wi-Fi hiccups throughout his time with the Pixel 6a, or at least his review in it. However, he claims that this could be down to Spectrum, which has had a lot of issues recently, rather than his device disconnecting, and I must admit I haven't had any Wi-Fi issues with my own device. Even if you put them to the side, it is unfortunate to say that the Pixel 6a just probably isn't the phone to buy if network performance is something crucial to you day in, day out. If you're in a city or well-covered area, like I am here in the UK, most of the time you'll just be fine and you won't notice any problems. But if you live in work in a rural area with spotty coverage, the Pixel 6a will eventually be a source of frustration or even potentially worse. Google clearly needs to spend some time fixing its network performance on the Pixel 7 generation and of course Tensor 2, because as it stands today, it's something that actively hinders the company's biggest and best phones. In terms of battery, the Pixel 6a is powered by a 4410 mAh battery, which is actually not that much smaller than the Pixel 6. And with a smaller 6.1-inch display and a lower 60Hz refresh rate, we actually expected results to be roughly on par, if not a little better than the baseline Pixel 6. Unfortunately though, that hasn't been the case. Even with a distinctly average day with the Pixel 6a, think things like social media, responding to messages and managing email while on Wi-Fi. 3 to 4 hours of screen on time, as tracked by Google's digital wellbeing app, since the company ruined Android 12's battery tracker, actually appear to be the norm for us. Generally speaking, the Pixel 6a can last a full day, but would usually need topping up around 10 PM or so. This is not terrible battery life by any stretch of the imagination, but far from the super extended lifespans that the A series has become known for. Using a cellular network is notorious for draining battery on Google Tensor powered devices, so it's important to note that your mileage may vary, but still, it's hard to not be a little bit disappointed although of course there are no two use cases that are the same, so your mileage, as I mentioned, may vary. Charging is also capped at 18 watts, there is no 30 watt charging here on this device, and there is no wireless charging on top of that. That said, an 18 watt charge brick, if you have one lying around, as you'll need to pick one up yourself, should top this phone up in under an hour and a half. Of course, the camera has always been the bread and butter of the Pixel lineup, and the Pixel 6a is no different. Well, to an extent it might be. The phone packs two rear camera sensors, a familiar 12.2 megapixel primary camera and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera with a 114 degree field of view. Effectively, it's the same camera package that the Pixel 5 offered, and in some ways, that's not a bad thing. In general shooting, the Pixel 6a does hold up well. It can capture plenty of detail in good lighting, and Google's HDR magic produces stunning shots. The only areas where the camera really starts to struggle is in less than ideal lighting conditions, and actually when trying to zoom in. The thing is, digital zoom is pretty terrible on this device, even with Google's optimizations, so going any further than 2x zoom really starts to destroy images pretty quickly. And looking at Google's Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, that all really stings. Those phones have that new 50 megapixel camera sensor, which is sharper, better at digital zoom, and just better overall in low light conditions, even without needing software to help out. Those phones also produce notably better video, an area where the Pixel 6a is less than impressive, at least compared to the best in the business. If you put the same image from a Pixel 6a up against one from the Pixel 6 or 6 Pro, the difference though is usually pretty stark. But realistically, it makes sense. With a flagship chip under the hood, cuts had to be made somewhere to hit this price point, and the camera also makes complete sense alongside the display and some of the actual materials used in this phone. Even with that in mind, this is still one of the best smartphone cameras for the price range because it is just so consistent and it's backed by Google's computational photography prowess. Although in the same breath, this feels like pushing it on just how long Google can reuse this same old setup. It would be a stretch to include another 12 megapixel sensor next year, and we really hope to see Google introducing something new and particularly something sharper for the next A series device. Just a few more things before we wrap up and give you our full overview. A common point of contention on the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro was the fingerprint scanner, which was criticised by many for being slow, inaccurate, and most of the time unreliable. Our take on the sensor was much less harsh, as we felt it was slow, but fairly reliable for the most part, at least in our own experiences. The Pixel 6a though is a slight improvement on the whole. It feels a tick faster than the Pixel 6 Pro, but just barely. You'll really only notice the difference in side-by-side usage, although most of you probably won't do that anyway. In terms of reliability though, I would say it certainly feels a bit better. One weird quirk here though is that you can actually only save 4 fingerprints versus 5 on the 6 and 6 Pro, though that might be something of a little bit of a deal breaker for you out there. The haptics here are fairly tight and solid, but a little bit less crisp than on the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, while these speakers are acceptable but not exactly brilliant. The max volume is a little low, but you can easily watch video or listen to a podcast with no great problems using that bottom firing tweeter and the earpiece in tandem. The Pixel 6a is coming out just in time for the Pixel 3a to be officially sunset. That older phone's final update has yet to arrive, but there's only one more left if you are hanging on to that device. That means if you are holding on to the Pixel 3a or 3a XL, we think the Pixel 6a is pretty much the ideal upgrade. In terms of size, the 6a is roughly the same size as the standard 3a, just with smaller bezels. It also comes with an addition of an ultra-wide camera, a better display, and most crucially, the major chip upgrade that is Google Tensor. Compared to the Snapdragon 670 found in the 2019 version of this phone, the Tensor chip itself is a gigantic upgrade. It's even a huge upgrade compared to what was found in the Pixel 4a and even the 5a. So if you are looking to move on to one of those or from one of those devices, this actually might be one worth looking at. I would say that this is a potential phone for most of you out there who maybe don't quite want the Pixel 6 and just want a slightly smaller phone. And then if you have an older device, the 6a is the perfect replacement. The only question is it worth paying $150 more for the Pixel 6 instead? And looking exclusively at Google's existing lineup, the 6a is in a relatively strange spot. It's incredibly similar to the 6 and even the 6 Pro thanks to the Google Tensor processor under the hood. Really, that's a great thing for devices because it means you get all of the great extras and hardware and software benefits regardless of which one you do pick. But with only $150 between the $449 Pixel 6a and the $599 Pixel 6, which is actually available at quite big discounts now, it's admittedly difficult to pick between the two. The extra cash, which equates to just a few dollars a month extra on payment plans, adds a lot to the experience. The extra RAM and the higher refresh rate lead to a smoother overall experience, plus the 50 megapixel camera on the Pixel 6 is noticeably better than the 6a's 12 megapixel camera in almost every regard. And of course, you get wireless charging on top of that, which is always a nice addition too. The thing is, with the Pixel 6a, Google struck an excellent balance of price to performance, and you're getting a genuinely great value phone out of this package. If the additional features though of the standard Pixel 6 are worthwhile to you, it's certainly worth considering, but you actually can't go wrong in either scenario. So that's the Pixel 6a. It really is a budget Pixel 6 for better or worse. We'd love to know what you think. Let us know down in the comment sections below, and be sure to stay tuned for more content featuring this device very soon. Until next time though, this is Damien with 9to5 Google saying thanks for watching, and I will speak to you later.